Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the podcast. This week, I was given the wonderful opportunity to be able to catch up and talk to Alison. Now, Alison is a life coach, and she helps people dealing with overwhelm, among with any other things. And we had a wonderful conversation about some of the emotional intelligence that's required when running a business, but also some of the mindset shifts and the changes that happen in our mind when we are looking to take on those challenging scenarios, and or when we have conflict in our life as well. So Alison, if you're watching back, thank you ever so much for coming on and giving me the time. And if you're coming back and this is your first episode, I would love to know what you think in the comment section down below. And thank you ever so much for coming back once again. I'm now going to hand over to Alison, who's going to introduce herself a little bit more. And we're leading into that interview. So I will see you very, very soon.
So I'm Alison Sinclair. I'm a self-leadership and work-life empowerment coach. I left my corporate role in IT a couple of years ago to set up my business, which is called Live Your Truth Coaching. I'm all about people and helping them to lead their life. So I'm always interested to start a conversation with them to say, are you leading your life, or is life leading you? And that can definitely make for some interesting answers.
Absolutely, and welcome to the podcast. And I think it's a really interesting point and a really important point, because a lot of people feel like they're in charge of their life when potentially they're not. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but it's something which for a long time it's something which I think people need to think about, is regards to like who actually has the control. But we did for this one we did prep some questions, which is great, but what advice would you give to people who building off what we just discussed about being in charge of your life, what advice would you give to people to actually live their best life? Because I think their best life specifically is going to be very different, right, for every person.
Absolutely. Well, I personally started my own self-development journey back in 2003 or 4, and I knew at the time I didn't feel my life was quite where I wanted it to be. Purely just it didn't feel right, didn't feel good. I knew that I wasn't happy career-wise. I guess I just had that inner sense of not really feeling like I was really living, more existing, which I think a lot of people at times can resonate with. And I started that journey, and now we're in 2022, nearly said 21. Always takes a bit of time to get used to writing and saying the new year, doesn't it? But yeah, I started that journey really with the intention of improving my life. But I guess looking back now, I didn't realize that it's an ongoing journey. It's a never-ending one. And that is really to learn about yourself and to know yourself. And, there's been loads of studies done around self-awareness and how many people believe that they are self-aware versus how many are actually self-aware. There's a whole bunch of reasons and science behind that. But we're not static beings. We're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving. Yes, we can look at the past to inform perhaps what we see today. But understanding who we are in the moment here and now and what it is that we want for ourselves is often something that people struggle to answer. I get curious about the fact, are our thoughts our own? And most times people go, are my thoughts my own? Yeah, they're my own. But in the coaching space, that when I've been the coachee or the coach, you discover quite often that a lot of what we believe to be our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas, our opinions, our desires have come from external influences, from when we were really young, from authority figures, from teachers, from people we've worked with. And as much as we might not want to think that we're succumbing to the external influences around us about how we should be, what we should have, what we should do, we are very socially influenced when it comes to our identity. So to answer your question would be really to start a journey with yourself to really self-examine, self-reflect, get to know yourself, and don't ever stop learning.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think it's a really important point, especially the learning aspect of that, because, I think there's a misconception sometimes when people, as we were discussing a little bit before we started the podcast, about when they start out on their journey towards entrepreneurship or business owner or moving careers or moving jobs, etc., they are looking for this kind of like perfect opportunity moment to do it, right? And I think they're like, yeah, when this thing happens, I'll then make the decision to go full time, or then I'll make the decision to start that side hustle, or then I'll pursue whatever it is that you're pursuing, right? Like, maybe in my world, it's I want to make some videos for a living, or I want to start making money from video or photos, or etc. But I think the same logic could be if you want to make candles, or the same logic can be if you want to make computer games, or you want to design art, or etc. There's a lot of hurdles that are very similar in that respect in regards to the common ones, like how do you get clients, how do you build a reputation, yada yada yada. But, and I'm sure we'll get into those, but I think the main thing there is, as you so kindly went over, is about understanding what's going to make you happy, what's going to really be, your true you, so to speak. And, one of the main things that I've learned through the last couple of years has been that it's not me versus XY person, it's me versus the previous me. Right, so as long as I'm becoming the better version of myself, or I'm pushing myself in comparison to my own, so where I was, then that's all that matters, because I have the same limitations I had, or I have the same amount of time or the amount of resources or etc. that I had, but someone else might have not the same amount of time, not the same amount of resources, not the same amount of quote unquote skills, all the things you can develop, but it's not a fair comparison because they're not going to necessarily have 15 to 20 hours or etc. to put into that skill across 2 days, for example. Or, they're not going to have 12 hours a day that they can work because of other responsibilities they have in their life. What would you say to people? Because I imagine quite a lot of people that you potentially work with or are listening to this are going to run into this kind of, might need to have this mindset shift in the respect to, because, as you were saying, a lot of people look for external, whether we do it subconsciously or whether we're doing it consciously, we have this level of kind of like looking for approval from our friends or our teachers or our parents or our co-workers or etc. in that respect. I mean, how can someone start really shifting or really getting in touch with their own, I guess, self-worth? I was thinking like how to articulate it, but I think it's actually self-worth, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in what you've just mentioned, and I guess it comes back to learning about yourself, to know yourself, to trust yourself. And when we really know ourselves, it makes decisions much easier. And we really know, what is our strengths, not just something that we can do well, but something that we really enjoy. We can more sharply, more astutely make choices that are really in alignment with us, and with that sense of knowing and that sense of self-assurance. I think it comes back down to the fact that, biologically, we are wired for safety. We are wired to be tribal. So this urge or this sense of need to seek approval, with a need to want to belong, with a need to want to, get praise, to be accepted, to be liked, to be included. Those are very strong drivers of our behaviors, and it's useful to be aware of that. So the kind of the confidence and trust to strike out on our own can take a bit of cultivation, because we're trying to fit in naturally. We want to feel that sense of acknowledgement from around us, back to being wired for safety. And we're also wired for connection. because of that tribal nature. And because of, obviously, back in the day, when people were running around hunting wild animals and it was cavemen, then it came back down to those very primitive drivers, which unfortunately, in some respects, our brain hasn't really upgraded to kind of catch up with the modern world of things. So we've still kind of got that in there, but that awareness of it and awareness of, being your own person is okay, and all of the benefits that come with that can really start to, come from a place of self-acceptance. So, really accepting yourself as who you are, but that comes back to knowing who you are, knowing where you are. It doesn't mean accepting your weaknesses. It doesn't mean accepting negative habits and doing nothing about them. It's around that thing of understanding our attitudes, our behaviors, our lifestyle, and knowing that this is how we are in this moment. If we want something different, then we need to take action to make changes. So it's really about loving yourself, but it's hard to love yourself if you don't really know yourself. It's hard to accept yourself if you don't really have a keen awareness of, well, how do I learn? What habits do I have daily? What skills do I have? How do I come across? Have I sought external feedback? Not because the feedback's fact, it's an opinion, but it's useful data and insights to build an awareness of how we're presenting ourselves, whilst also having our own internal awareness that can really, I guess, kind of help give us a sense of centered balance, to be less judgmental of ourselves. And I think you mentioned around the value piece. It is really, again, knowing ourselves is not a one-time event. It's not a destination and tick, you've done it and that's it, it's all done and dusted. It's like self-awareness. You don't just go, oh, I'm self-aware. We have different levels of self-awareness, and that's why I always really sort of encourage people to keep learning, that we're all learning. And back to what you said is really that sense of comparison doesn't often produce, especially in the world that we're in, it doesn't often produce anything positive. But if we have a sense of self-acceptance about us, we can look at what others are doing as a means of motivation, as a means of inspiration, rather than use it as a big stick to hit ourselves over the head with, which doesn't really help anyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's especially something which you'll be, potentially some people will be at the start of their journey very self-critical of, though. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm self-aware, but etc, 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 right? Like, oh, maybe I'm not doing this, or maybe I'm doing that, and it leads on nicely to being so my next question, which is going to be about marketing or your language when it comes to marketing, because a lot of the work we do is helping our clients understand, firstly, well, what language should you be using, what words should you be using, how does that help, or how does that work with your ideal client, but then being authentic to yourself within your marketing as well, I think is really important. And part of the reason why we run a podcast is so I personally can be really authentic in how I talk about what we do and what I talk about within this candid, quote unquote, conversation. I mean, have you found in your own experience with obviously marketing your own business, or previously in your IT career, if you had any crossover within the marketing world there, have you seen kind of a change in how people are really being authentic in what they're talking about and being what I would see as their true self, or belief as their true self?
I think within the coaching space, it can be part of the challenge of the journey of setting up your coaching business, in terms of, again, back to who are you? And, as coaches, there might be an impression that coaches have got it all together. They know what's what, they know themselves inside and out, but, most of the time, they're as much on a journey as anyone else is. I guess there's an acceptance of we don't really know what we don't know about lots of things, including ourselves. And for example, in the coaching space, it's really around, I think you actually mentioned it earlier on, was like when we spoke previously, around, who is on a similar journey to you and who perhaps can you help, in terms of leveraging your skills, your strengths, your experiences, your insights, etc. That can sometimes help us identify a little bit of our authentic voice of what's important to us, what's meaningful for us, what challenges have we overcome that we can really speak to, with a sense of that sort of assuredness again, because I've lived it, I've done it kind of thing. So that can certainly help. But I think in the coaching space, as an example from marketing, it can be all too easy to look over the fence and think, oh, somebody's saying it this way, somebody's doing it that way. And when we aren't really sure what we're doing, rather than really think and do the work, it's easier to look at what others are doing. And, it's not to not be inspired, but it's easier to kind of almost try and mirror or try and emulate what somebody else is doing. But in the process, whilst that might work for a while, we tend to dilute ourselves and we dilute our essence of what really makes us us. And that kind of is part of the journey in some respects, unless you are somebody who has a really good grasp on what is my authentic voice here, what is it that's meaningful, what do I really stand for, beyond being a nice person, what do I really care about,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, really important. I think there's sometimes a fine line between being inspired by an idea and flat out copying it. And I think, there's no such thing as a unique idea anymore, because everything has been done at least once by someone, right? Like, it has. But there's ways to do it. And the thing is, like, people always ask me, oh, well, it's been done before, right? Like, the concept of a podcast isn't new, but it hasn't been done the way I'm going to do it. In the same way, it hasn't been done for the listener the way they're going to do it, or the same way they're going to do video content, or the same way they're going to do written content, or the same way they're going to coach, perhaps. It's not done their way, and that's what makes it unique. But you have to be, I think, in a position, firstly, where, overall, I mean, my next question was going to be about mental health, so, to give you a moment to prepare, but I think that the main thing is going to be to understand yourself and understand what value you have to your quote-unquote market, and then you're never going to be confident straight away about it, but then, breeding that confidence within it, and from what I found anyway, being completely honest with look, my mental health is really bad right now, or really good right now, or indifferent right now, in some of the marketing stuff you do, especially when you are, in our case anyway, we film a huge amount of my work life, right? I capture a huge amount of it. There's probably less not filmed than actually is filmed or is not talked about within a piece of content somewhere. But that's our ISP, that's our business model. That's part of me being my authentic self, is being completely transparent with how I'm feeling. But that means you're going to get stages and you're going to get points where my own mental health or someone on my team's mental health or etc. is going to take a knock for whatever reason. I mean, have you found that there's a lot of stages when it comes to like actually being aware of your mental health and being okay with talking about it? Because I think, especially for guys, for a long time when I was growing up, it wasn't something that we could actually talk about. It was just this kind of like, it doesn't matter, man up, get on with it kind of thing. And it was kind of that for a long time, which is nice to be kind of past, if that makes sense, in the respect to like we're actually able to, say, look, actually my mental health isn't very good right now, but it's going to get better.
Really interesting topic and question from the point of view of just talking about it and having, you mentioned, an awareness. I think it's fair to say for a really long time there's been no stigma, there's been no hesitation to actively share with others, oh, I'm going to the gym and I'm going 4 times a week and I'm doing da 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 da, or I'm running a marathon, and talk very openly, very freely about looking after our physical health, or, I'm going on the next diet, or whatever it might be. So there's never really been any kind of sense, certainly in my lifetime, of restriction around openly, naturally talking about that. And I think the first step is to recognize that, our mental capacity is part of us the same way the rest of the physical body is, that we take to the gym. And I think it's that first and foremost awareness that, it's okay to talk about it. In a nutshell, it's part of us. It's part of how we're made up and what makes us us. I think in terms of mental health daily, we all have mental health, and it can be affected by a number of factors that are very specific to us as individuals, which again puts me back in my soapbox around really take the time to invest in yourself, to know yourself, and to keep learning about yourself, because it's really our biggest tool in our kit box to really help cultivate things like resilience, cultivate an awareness of, like you said, when maybe my mental health needs some attention, needs some nurturing, and understanding what that actually looks like for you, because for some people it could be some daily breath work. For some people it could be really becoming aware of their thoughts and their thought patterns, and having a reflective practice. Maybe they've had a bit of a conflict at work, and maybe taking a step back after that to really have a think about what happened, what was said, how did I show up, how did I interact, what was going on for me there, what emotions were coming up for me, and what can I learn from those emotions, as a means to be out of the heat of a moment when it might have been quite stressful, to have that interaction or conflict at work, to look at it from a place of calm, to look at perhaps what else was going on that I didn't see, how else might I have tackled that, what did I own in that conversation, and what was for the other person to own, as a way to grow past those types of interactions, so the next time we have one, not only can we perhaps handle it more effectively, but it doesn't necessarily affect our mental health for the rest of the day, but it might have done previously without the self-development work. So we can make really small shifts, but again, it depends. I think the positive thing is the fact we're talking about mental health. Whilst there are still a lot of misunderstandings out there around what it is, how it is, what it means, there's still a lot of stigma. And I think, there's work to be done for sure, but at least we've started it. And I think as a business owner, somebody said, the biggest self-development journey you'll ever go on is creating a business. And it's not for everyone, because it can be such a roller coaster that it does demand a level of resilience. But to your point, it's really important to understand mental health, what that means for us specifically, because what it might mean for me and what it might mean for you be totally different. How it might manifest might be different. What I might decide is a bad mental health week or day or whatever for me might be something totally different for you. So it's beginning to, again, learn, know, notice, and through that noticing, build that awareness to take actions that really support us in self-coaching ourselves, in supporting ourselves, and really setting ourselves up for success. One of the things in mental health or not in mental health, but just in general, is the expectations we have of ourselves, and the judgment, self-judgment. I notice those come up a heck of a lot. And one of the practices that I personally have been starting to cultivate more of, because I've become more aware of how it gets in my own way, to lead my day, to get the things done I want to get done, is suspend self-judgment. So suspend judgment in the act of creation. So rather than, let's say I was writing a social media post, or I was doing a project at work, rather than stop-start every sentence of writing that post and going, is it good enough, is it not good enough? oh, I don't think that's right, do I have anything valuable to say, and letting all of the inner chatter get the better of us, we might not get that post done. We might not even publish it. So suspending judgment and just letting ourselves, and I think you also might have said this when we were chatting before about getting into a flow state, not trying to overly control things, and learning about what we can control, which is our attitude and our effort. Most other things we can't. So that comes back to that acceptance again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just building off what you were talking about control, when you maybe have a conflict with a client or a conflict with a colleague or a friend or a parent, etc., whoever it may be, the way I look at it is, am I increasing the likelihood of that situation to end or increasing the likelihood of that situation to become worse? So, it might be that I'm trying to rile that person up potentially so that the argument continues, instead of trying to understand and trying to be empathetic to how that person is feeling at that time, but also then giving a moment between that before I then explain how I am feeling about that situation, right? So I think it takes a certain level of emotional intelligence to get to be able to do that, number one. And if one doesn't have that at the moment, that's okay, but I would recommend that for one of the main things that will always help you in whether you do a business for 3 months or 6 months or a year, and then you choose, actually, I'm going to go back into employed work, because as you so kindly said, running a business is hard. Running a business isn't for everyone, and you have to truly core want it. And it's something that can go, and something that could go tomorrow, right? But that's okay. Firstly, the concept of that is okay. But then secondly, it's about trying to build skills and understanding, and connecting with people is always something you're going to do in your life, full stop, no matter how you are. So whether you're a business owner or whether you're a colleague or you're part of an organization, you're still going to have to talk to and transact with people in one way or another. So it's about, for me anyway, it's about understanding that, and then also about being appreciative of the fact that you can actually help decrease that situation. You can bring that situation back to a kind of level which is everyone's cool, everyone's happy, everyone's productive, everyone's feeling like they're making good progress with whatever it is that they're trying to do, without it seeming like, oh, this person has a grudge, or oh, this person is just trying to rile me up, because it can get very nasty. And just to finish that point, I think a lot of people, the easiest option is to be in a position where you hold a grudge against someone because they've wronged me, so to speak, or they've done this thing that really upsets me. Okay, so then my question would be to you, have you talked to that person about how that made you feel, firstly? And then secondly, why do you feel like you need to hold a grudge? Think about it this way. The amount of energy you have using on holding that grudge, if you had spent on building something for yourself, or put it into your side hustle, or put it into that project at work, or etc., imagine how more productive you would be, and imagine the feedback loop that you would then trigger. And that's why flow state's really important for me, and that's why I always start with small tasks in the day, to make sure that even if it's something simple like before this, I was like, I need new podcast guests. Okay, cool. So what am I going to do about that? Right? I need to reach out to people and see if they're interested in coming on. Okay, great, cool. So that's a very small, easy task. So just sending a message takes 3 seconds, 4 seconds, but it can trigger a momentum shift in my entire day, right? Because it can be like, actually, look at all this I've achieved in the short period of time. I mean, is there other things that you have worked with specifically with your clients or with yourself that are also kind of momentum shifts, or are things that, because I think sometimes we can wake up and we can go, I don't really feel like work today, especially when we need to self-motivate ourselves as a business owner, or have the discipline, not even self-motivation, because if you need motivation to be successful, you'll work 3 days in your life, in my opinion. It's more about having the discipline to be like, well, actually, no, you are going to work today, you are going to have a good day. But then also, once you've gone into that day and it's like, actually, it's either going well or it's not, then you can be like, actually, okay, maybe today's a good day to take off. I mean, is there other kind of momentum things that one can do?
Absolutely. I hope you don't mind, but you said something really interesting that I think would be remiss not to bring up, which is around the example you gave of an interaction with somebody else and holding on to it. And if I could share one thing I've really learned is a constant learning for me, as for others, about when to hold on and when to let go in life. That could be when to hold on in a job, when to let go, when to hold on in a relationship, when to let go, when to hold on with a point that you're trying to make, when to let go, and also to your point around the energy that you invest and where do you invest it. And I think the holding on, letting go thing, I always get reminded of when you said about holding on and being perhaps feeling, resentful, or maybe have some other negative feelings around an interaction, that it's like holding a hot coal in your own hand, and the only person who's getting burned is you because you're holding on to it. So let it go. A bit like the other analogy, which is, the professor who stood at the front of the lecture hall with a glass of water and asked his students, how heavy is this glass of water? And of course the answer was, well, it depends how long you hold it for. So these are nice kind of metaphors, analogies, etc., to remind us that the importance of learning to let go and the benefit that has to our mental health and our well-being, the benefit that has to using our energy wisely and redirecting it to something more positive, which brings me on to your question around momentum and shifts and so on, and motivation. I think, lots of people I've spoken to in the last couple of years with the pandemic, and of course, that lull period between Christmas and New Year, people can feel like they've lost their mojo. They're not really feeling motivated, and you've got the opposite crowd of people who are like, yeah, here's my word of 2022, and I'm doing this resolution and this goal and this intention and da 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 da, and it's like, oh my god, like all this pressure to have to do something and be something and have a goal, and they're feeling quite the opposite, in fact. I think whether it's that situation or just generally trying to keep a sense of momentum, and let's call that momentum fuel in your tank to take action. For me personally, one of the simplest things are looking at small wins, taking small steps daily that create a positive feedback loop. We know the way that we learn across humans, not just the way I learn, is around, if we create a positive feedback loop, it has a reinforcing effect. So back to putting that positive fuel back into, the engine to propel us forward, it really is around, I don't like to-do lists. I don't like lists in general. I prefer stop doing lists, because often that's actually where our focus is better served, and stop doing things that make space for better things. But I think that if you were to make any list, would be at the end of a day, write a got done list, and that be your only list. What did you get done today? And breaking it down from the simple things that we probably would overlook potentially, like, oh, I got up, I washed my face, I washed my hair, I put on a nice shirt, I made myself a really nice breakfast to set myself up for the day. I did some exercise, I did some breathing, I did some meditation, I took breaks throughout the day, I took a step towards XYZ goal, whatever it might be. It might be a step that has 5 or 6 steps to achieving that goal, but you took one step. But often people don't recognize the achievement until they've hit the goal, and they don't recognize the 5 steps that took them there. So that's why I would say, to put positive fuel and momentum in your tank, create positive feedback loops of what did you get done today. And most of the time when people reflect, they're surprised of how much they actually did get done, because they've not noticed what they've done, or they've dismissed it. So they've deleted that positively productive action that they took. And by starting to get that habit of noticing, it can make a huge difference to propel us to keep taking steps, to to just make us feel good. We know that we are at our most productive when we have positive emotions. So as another way is look at what creates positive emotion in you. Is it singing? Is it dancing? Is it listening to a particular song? Is it exercise? Is it being outside and feeling the sun in your face? What things, is it speaking to somebody that you like having a really good chat and a laugh with, and you come off the phone, every time you speak to them, you're like, oh my God, what a laugh that was such a good call. Whatever it might be to generate those positive emotions, again, can be fuel that we put in the tank to help propel us energetically, as well as psychologically with I've got some things done today. It's not a loss. And positively intending to create those loops for yourself. For some clients, that's been, they've had like one of those kind of like mason type jars, and they'll have coloured post-it notes. And every single time they get something done, if they want to do it there and then, they write it in the post-it and put it in the jar. Or they do it at the end of the day and put it in the jar and then go, oh my God, look at how full the jar is now. So it's the mindset shift to positively feed that on a daily basis. I could talk about loads of different ideas, but I have a feeling we'd be here all day. But hopefully those give you some ideas, some start points anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point. And, I'm just going to build off what you were saying just now about positive intent and positive momentum. And, it's about goal setting mainly, because I think sometimes the misconception is if I don't hit my goal, I'm going to be really sad or really upset. I think for me, what I've found as I've set goals and I've achieved those goals is actually the journey getting to the goal is actually the thing that's actually more enjoyable than achieving the goal. Because all that happens when you achieve the goal, in my experience, is, okay, cool, I've achieved the goal, but now what? Right? Now what am I going to do? Now what's the next step? So, for me, and maybe this is just for me, but, everyone who I talk to about goal setting, I always say, why don't you set a goal that's ridiculous? Absolutely ridiculous, right? It's the moon for you. The point is not to hit the goal. The point is to have something always that you're actually arguably never going to hit. Okay, that's fine, because once you change your psychological response to not hitting the goal in the first place, so you're not disappointed when you don't hit it, or etc., what ends up happening is, what if you got halfway to that goal? Right, so let's say it's a sum of money. Okay, so set your sum of money at a ridiculous amount of money for you, right? We'll use the six-figure analogy that a lot of people will use. I want to hit 100k. Okay, cool. But what if you got halfway? That means you're on 50k. So if you had a goal of 50k, you might have hit 50k. But you're going to gain, in my opinion anyway, you're going to gain less momentum and less kind of drive to get there if it's it's kind of an easy goal to achieve, right? So for me, I would always be like, set a goal, as I say, that's completely ridiculous for you. Again, it's for you. It's not for anyone else. It's for you, right? Like if you think benching, 60k is a ridiculous goal for you. Okay, so that is your goal. Okay, cool. Doesn't matter if someone else can do that easily, because again, it's this concept of it's not you v them, it's you v you. And I think that the main thing, do you find that some people really get disheartened when they don't achieve whatever it is that they're looking to, I didn't hit 100k, or I didn't get to lift that 60k? And if so, how can people start changing their relationship, if you agree that they should change their relationship to setting goals?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I just wrote a short blog actually for a newsletter last week, kind of around this a little bit. So I'm trying to think about where to start, but I'm not a massive fan of goals or getting too hung up on them. They're there like a pin in a map. Like I'm in Scotland and I want to go to Japan. So pin in Scotland, pin in Japan. Okay, how am I going to get there? So from that point of view, they can serve as a good anchor point, frame of reference, direction of travel. Goals often are quite often external to us. and they're typically involve a lot of factors that are out with our personal control. So I think that whilst goals are useful, as I said, I don't get too hung up on them. Intentions, on the other hand, are internal, they're intrinsic to us, and we can own it. I intend to lead the day with courage. I intend to lead the day with kindness. I intend to take frequent breaks today. So back to, we can control our effort and we can control our attitude. And that awareness and knowing that whilst we might set ourselves a goal, there's only certain parts of that goal that we can truly influence. And having a positive expectation over the parts we can control and influence, that we can make those happen. But there's potentially other roadblocks that might get in the way that we have to accept. There's just nothing we could do about it. We'd be fighting a losing battle with ourselves. So to fully expect for some goals is understanding, are they realistic? Which parts of it can I influence and control, and which parts might I not, that potentially may result in a different outcome? Not necessarily I didn't achieve it, not necessarily a failure, but you get a different outcome to the one you were expecting, which, might by all accounts be somewhat disappointing, but it's also good data. It's good data to provide you insights to go, ooh, well, actually, a little bit like what you just said, a lot of it's about the journey, right? More about the process. And a lot of the nuggets of gold are to be found in the process. But we get too fixated on the end point, a bit like I said earlier, that there might be 5 steps to achieving a goal. We don't acknowledge the progress we made from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and so on. We only acknowledge the goal if it's been met or not. So it's about really getting realistic, really noticing, breaking it down, and having more of a balanced perspective around what can we truly make happen here. What other things might we try to make happen, but have an insight and a perspective around, well, it might happen and it might not, because not everything's within my control. But from what I can control, actually, this is how I'm going to tackle it. So I think there's a broader conversation to be had about goals in general, and it really comes down to each individual, your mindset, your paradigms around life. But when we think about making changes, certainly in the coaching space, for example, or working towards something, it is that thing of understanding our capabilities, and having a positive expectation that we can drive some of those outcomes. It is, again, going back to a healthy, positive mindset, to set ourselves up that no matter what that outcome is, it doesn't totally derail us. We don't wallow in disappointment, and we don't decide we're throwing in the towel. So we have that, I guess, almost mindset of, what have I learned in the process? What outcomes did arise from the efforts and energy that I put in? What else happened? What can I learn? And how can I use that to keep moving forwards? I guess a little bit back to your point about momentum earlier on.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point to establish that there's only so much that you can control. The pandemic was a key example of this, right? Like if people had objectives or goals at the start of 2020, funnily enough, they probably weren't the same about 3-4 months in because of COVID, right? But COVID is just an example of when unexpected things occur, right? Like when things that are completely out of your control just happen, right? And they're gonna put you on your ass, or they're gonna throw you a curveball, or they're gonna make it very challenging for you to do what you want and go in the direction you want. Okay, and then it's down to you to be like, okay, you're gonna let this, as you say, you need to throw in the towel at that point, or are you gonna be like, actually, there's another way around, or actually there's another approach I can take. Okay, well maybe I won't achieve that goal this year, or maybe I won't achieve that thing, whatever that thing may be, in the time period I expected, but with that being said, because of this thing, look how much I have achieved, right? look how much I did achieve when we were in the middle of lockdown. Look how much I did do, you know, even if something simple of I got out of bed every day. Right? Like, and I think people misunderstand or really they don't take the little things, and that's why I really like the analogy that you used, where it was like celebrate your little wins, because to someone who has high functioning anxiety, for example, they won't get out of bed for days and days and days and days and days. And by them getting out of bed, they've won. To them, they've won. And it's really important to be in that position where no matter what your struggle is, right? So if it's you're dealing with really bad mental health at the time for whatever reason, and then you get through it, don't look at how productive were you when you had a challenge with your mental health. Look through and say, look, I got through it, and look what I'm now going to achieve, and look how it's made me stronger, and look what I've learned from it, and look, and there's always a positive from everything, I believe anyway, if you know how to look at it, and if you look, if you know how to look and you know where to look to see that silver lining on anything, even an argument or even a disagreement or even being dismissed from work or being made redundant or etc. It's throwing you into a brand new set of opportunities that only you can choose whether you actually utilize them or you're going to showcase them and you're going to use them in the correct way for you. I think that's the really important bit, and I'm conscious of time, so I think let's wrap up soon. But towards the end of the podcast, I do like to give you an opportunity to ask me anything that you may directly want to ask or not, or throw in a topic for us to discuss if you have anything.
Sure. No, just firstly to say thank you. It's been great to chat to you today, and I'm sure no doubt we'll have more conversations, knowing us. But I think it's always interesting. Everybody has a story, even they might not think they do, but everybody has a story. And I guess I'm curious around, a little bit around your story. I know some of it, but if we were to, let's just say, catapult ourselves to 2023, what might your story be then?
Hopefully, it will be along the, in line with whatever my desire is then. If that is, I've said for a long time, for as long as I want to grow the company, that's what I'll do. But by that point, or in 2024, 2025, 2026, etc., there may be a point where I go, actually, I've grown the company to the point where I'm happy. Right, and I want to have more of a work-life balance, kind of a real balance, because for those who know me and those who talk to me regularly, they know that I work all the time. Now that's a choice, because what I do for work is what I would do for enjoyment. That's the reality. That's the facts. So when I say I'm working, yes, I am technically, but actually, in reality, I'm having a lot of fun creating a lot of content and trying to build something greater than me. But I think it's very important to establish that want and that need and that desire is going to change at some point. And, ironically, one of the things that I'm going to find very interesting is seeing in 5 years and seeing in the 5 years I've run the company, how each year has changed in regards to my perspective on the growth, in regards to my perspective on what my role really is, but also what I'm comfortable with as well, specifically. So for a long time, just to give a very brief story, in 2020 specifically, I had a huge problem with control. In respect to, I wanted to film everything, I wanted to edit everything, I wanted to, etc. And it was the main hurdle that was stopping my business growing at that point, because I didn't want to give up that control. I didn't want to give up, because I was like, it's not going to be to the quality, it's not going to be to the standard, it's not going to be this, it's not going to be that. But the problem was, I was pushing myself so hard that I couldn't take any time off at all, even when I needed to or even when I wanted to, because there was always so much to do. But now I've, removed that concept of I don't have to edit or control or film everything. Okay, great. And now it's allowed me to grow the company to the point where I can outsource it, or I can get other things to happen while I'm also doing things, which in turn means more things happen for the company, which is the only way to scale a company, in my opinion. It is. Once you get to a certain point, there is only so much one person can do. And that's fine, but it's then about establishing, well, what is the hurdle in you bringing in freelancers or bringing in people or bringing in people to help or bringing in employees potentially, if that's the decision you make. It's all what makes sense to you and that person, but also what makes sense to you being, as we discussed at the start, being integral to yourself, being true, your true self in that respect. And I think, in answer to your initial question, as long as I'm being integral to myself in 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026, so on, it's fine. It's completely fine. And, hopefully I'll be able to listen back to this podcast then and say, well, actually, yeah, I am. I am being integral to myself, and I am living what I feel is becoming the best version of me.
It's almost like these podcasts could be a letter in some way to your future self, huh?
Who knows? It's crazier things have happened.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said, though, is just kind of woven into a lot of the themes of today, and what you mentioned about managing everything yourself, knowing when to ask for help. It sounds like an easy thing to do, but for a lot of people it isn't. But it is one of those things that's really useful, healthy, and helpful to learn. But also what I've found is the assumptions we make about what can't happen. And in challenging those assumptions, often we realize what can. And that's when things really open up and become, you're no longer holding that glass of water. It becomes lighter, it becomes doable, and also feeds back into that momentum that you've spoken about a few times today. So I think a useful thing that certainly I've found, and maybe also it's come from your learnings, is what assumptions am I making, and are they really true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to understand those assumptions, but then be honest with your reaction to those assumptions as well. Right, as well. And I think it's really powerful once you can do that, because you don't have the hurdles that one would assume you have at that point. And I know we could talk for hours on this, but and we shouldn't today. But I really appreciate the time, and thanks for coming on. But for those people who may be interested in the blog that you talked about a little bit earlier, or potentially talking to you about some coaching stuff, or just seeing some more of your content online, where can people go? Where's best to reach out to kind of continue this conversation with you?
Sure, thank you. I guess I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. And I have my website, www.liveyourtruthcoaching.co.uk. But I'm always up for connecting with people on LinkedIn from a business networking standpoint, to know each other better. We always tend to know things that we don't value that can really help others. That's really, not a lot of effort or share. It's a little bit of that one man's trash is another man's treasure. And it's only by getting to know each other that we can realise we can really help one another beyond what we might assume we cannot do. So yeah, always good.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. We'll cut it off there. Thank you ever so much for joining me, ladies and gents. I hope you found this video and this piece of content valuable, and it gave you something that you can tangibly go and work on, or tangibly go and do specifically to increase the likelihood of you being able to do whatever it is that you're looking to do in this year or in the near future for you. So that might be starting a business, that might be asking that person out, or that might be something simple like just asking for a promotion at work. So thank you ever so much, as I say, for joining me once again. If you did enjoy this video, I'd love for you to think in the comment section down below. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to be subscribed, and I'll see you very, very soon.